Hello and welcome everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Tackling Renters' Energy Costs, How Local Governments Can Equitably Improve Efficiency. In this webinar, we'll discuss the inefficiencies of rental housing, energy affordability challenges for renters, and how local governments can help equitably improve the efficiency of rental units to lower costs. You will hear lessons from a new guide from 4 municipal officials, published by ACEEE in partnership with the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or USDN, which lays out a series of actions that local governments can take to reduce energy use in rental properties, preserve or increase housing affordability, and build the capacity of local communities to design, implement, and evaluate more equitable policies. Joining us for the webinar is a representative from USDN who will share how the resources fit into USDN's ongoing equity in buildings work, and a representative from the City of Minneapolis who works on an affordable housing energy efficiency program, who will share the program staff's experiences and lessons learned in serving residents. My name is Ariel Drehobel, and I'm the Local Policy Manager of Energy Equity at ACEEE, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping announcements. You have joined the webinar on listen-only mode, and you will stay muted throughout the webinar. If you want to ask a question to the panel, you can use the meeting chat tool to type your question there. And we encourage all attendees to ask questions throughout the webinar. We ask that you also please limit the use of the chat to asking questions for our panel so we can keep track of questions as they come in. And now I would like to introduce our distinguished panel of speakers for today. They are Catherine Wright, the Program Director for Buildings at USDN, Stefan Samaripis, Local Policy Manager at ACEEE, and Isaac Evans, Energy-Related Contract Manager for the City of Minneapolis' Green Cost Share 4D Energy Efficiency Program. We'll start with our first speaker, Catherine Wright, again, who's the Program Director for Building Energy at USDN. Catherine will give some background on USDN's focus on equity and how this influenced the development of this new guide. The floor is yours, Catherine.
Hi, everybody. It is very nice to virtually meet you. Just give me one moment while I pull up my slides here. And hopefully that's working fine. All right. So first, again, my name is Catherine Wright. I'm the Program Director for Building Energy at the Urban Sustainability Directors Network, or USDN for short. We're a peer learning network, and we've been around since 2008. And we started as a peer learning network of a couple of cities that all sought to advance sustainability and energy action. And now we are a network of almost 250 communities across the US and Canada, serving approximately 999 million people. So I just wanted to give that as a context to say that Minneapolis, who's featured today, is also a USDN member. So we have quite a bit of geographic range. And another thing that's really important to understand about the network and our members is that we have a very holistic review of what sustainability means and that we're committed to it. And it includes climate mitigation, equity, and climate resilience. And we have worked really hard to identify a set of high impact practices that we believe advance all three of these outcomes at the same time. And that's really what guides how we invest our time and energy in the network. And one of those high impact practices is very focused on the built environment and buildings. And a lot of people always ask me, why are local governments so interested in the built environment and why is a lot of time dedicated there? And that's because cities and counties have actually traditionally had a lot of authority over the built environment. On the new construction side, cities and counties can shape what the future of development looks like through planning and zoning policies. And cities also touch existing buildings. I know there's been a lot of conversation around how cities are working through building performance standards, but there's also other tools like inspection, licensing, and regulations that can actually impact how local governments interact with rental housing and other types of existing buildings. So even before the pandemic, our members are really beginning to ask questions about how they could drive change on sustainability within the residential sector. Admittedly, much of the conversations within USDN up until that point were really focused on large commercial buildings. We were very fortunate to have enlisted the help of ACEEE and Upright Consulting to help us develop and work with our members to focus a conversation around rental housing. The result of this effort was a year-long learning group and collaboration. The report that's being released and showcased today is really based on the findings of that group learning together. And we have a new set of members that is about to start continuing to meet again to explore these topics in more depth in the coming year. And I do want to say that in addition to this report, that the learning group is just part of our efforts to encourage people-centered approaches to thinking out buildings and building policy. We recently released an equity in buildings framework. It's free, it's available to the public, and it serves as a foundation to considering how equity intersects with sustainable buildings and really encourages relationship building processes with community members and collaborators. Outside of sustainability departments, as well as within the sustainability department. We really think that this serves as the connective tissue between our work with members and our learning groups, like the Rental Energy Efficiency Learning Group, and it complements some of the specific policy and programmatic approaches for rental housing that we'll be talking about today. We are very, very excited about the Rental Learning Group report because it provides critical guidance for our members that are exploring this topic area. And it's also highlighted on the Equity in Buildings Framework webpage. With that, I'm going to turn it over to the next speaker to share a little bit more in detail about what we learned in the learning group. And then I'll also place some links in the chat for those who might be interested in our high impact practices, which is how our approach to sustainability is informed, and a little bit more about our broader work on this topic. Thank you for having us, and I will turn it over back to Ariel.
Thank you, Catherine. Our next speaker is Stefan Samaripas, the local policy manager at ACEEE. Stefan will provide an overview of the guide's structure and key findings. And thanks for joining us today, Stefan. I'll pass it over to you. And as a quick reminder, if you have any questions for Catherine, please put those in the chat.
Okay, great. Okay, well, let me pull up my slides here real quick and we'll get going. So yes, again, my name is Stefan Samaripas. I'm part of our local policy team at ACEEE. And I'm going to give everyone a very quick overview on the guide that came out today. I definitely encourage all of you to take a closer look at the actual report itself because there's a ton in there. Especially we point folks in the direction of a lot of helpful resources in developing and implementing policies for rental properties. So it's chock full of good stuff. But to kind of walk you through the structure a little bit and give you at least an introduction to it, as Catherine and others have mentioned, this is really structured as a guide. And so, we walk local governments through some different steps that they will want to think about in terms of approaching rental energy efficiency policies and programs in an equitable way. And it sort of breaks down into four, primary steps. So the first is, really taking stock at the local level of what your own housing market, your rental housing market looks like. And also as a very important foundational and first step is engaging the community, conducting community engagement, especially thinking about reaching out to renters of color, low income renters. And we walk folks through a lot of the different aspects of what you want to think about in doing that. And then sort of armed with that information and doing that preliminary sort of assessment, then you can really start to think about sort of narrowing down your options as far as what policies or programs make sense, while also thinking about your own capabilities and your own resources. And then we do talk about not only just sort of how you get to a point of deciding what policy or program you want to follow through on, but we also talk a little bit about some lessons learned from those that have already come forward on these initiatives, and highlight sort of some things that you want to think about in terms of implementation. And sort of top above all of that is, that oftentimes it takes several or multiple different approaches to tackling rental property energy use, and because of that requires some good partnerships both within government and outside of it. So just to kind of walk you through some key things from each of these. I won't get into detail about sort of, local level rental housing market particulars, but I will, highlight just briefly a couple of things that are driving the rental housing market on the national scale and things you oftentimes see at the local level. so one of the things I think a lot of folks are very familiar with, we're faced with a really challenging environment in terms of finding affordable housing over the last several years. You know, low cost rental units have been on the decline, while those with, you know, the higher end rents have been on the increase. And for folks with low incomes, especially, that makes it really challenging to find an affordable rental unit. And so the result is that what you're seeing is that the housing cost burdens are substantial for those with lower incomes compared to those with higher incomes. And, you know, that's true in terms of just thinking about rents, but that's not the only thing to consider, you know, and this is something that we talk a lot about in the report and talked about a lot in our other research, which is energy cost burdens. You know, the share of income that renters pay for utility costs as part of their income are particularly pretty high for low income folks. You know, my colleague Ariel, who's moderating today, released a report just this past year that was looking at this and found that you know, that roughly one third of renters are paying what we would consider a high energy cost burden every month. So it's greater than 6% of their income is going towards energy bills. Commuting costs are also another thing. Folks are having to find rental housing sort of further out from maybe where their job is. And so that adds commuting costs. So in a lot of ways, especially for low income renters, they're facing a lot of difficult burdens. And so there's a really urgent need, not only to address the need for affordable housing with affordable rents, but also to address energy use and costs, whether that be associated with energy bills or with, you know, commuting costs that, you know, are also associated with energy use. So the second thing we highlight and talk about in the report is community engagement. This is, you know, we really kind of, in terms of how we talk about these two things, they're really important, you know, to both do as essential first steps in thinking about developing rental policies and programs. And we provide all sorts of resources, some good guides on community engagement, some of the many benefits for why this is important. And we also sort of, you know, we present what others before us have really, you know, kind of laid out, which is that community engagement really operates on a spectrum. And, you know, you have to really be cognizant and intentional about the way that you're structuring community engagement so that you are not only, you know, getting the right folks involved to develop an equitable policy or program, which of course, you know, would be obviously renters, low income renters, renters of color, other folks have been historically marginalized in your community. Not only just involving those folks, you know, and that's a step in the right direction, but also, you know, really getting those folks involved in crafting the direction that your policy or program is ultimately going to go. And so all kinds of great stuff in the report. I just wanted to highlight a couple of things very briefly here, and I'm happy to talk a little bit more about this in the Q&A if there are questions. So once you have an idea of what your rental housing stock is like, some of the, especially some of the challenges that renters are dealing with in your community, and have engaged those folks in thinking about developing these policies and programs, then you can really start to think about sort of what your options are. And also, you know, while considering your own capabilities, your own resources as a local government. And I won't go into super lengthy detail about all the different options, but you can see we lay out 10 different policy and program options to think about. And, you know, in selecting these policy and program options, we look to find, you know, what city or county governments are already doing, but we also, you know, gave consideration to highlighting those policy or programs that take an equitable approach. And, you know, these are policies and programs that are focused on preserving housing affordability or growing housing affordability, protecting tenants, you know, and ensuring that they are empowered to make more decisions regarding their own energy use. So, you know, again, there's all sorts of great examples in the report that you'll find, different highlighted city and county programs and policies. But, you know, ultimately they all sort of revolve around what we call the 3 Ps, which is a framework that a lot of affordable housing advocates have used. But again, you know, all the policies and programs we highlight revolve around one of these three principal aims. And then finally, we have a section, and this is kind of in addition to the work that Catherine mentioned. A lot of the guide does reflect a lot of the discussions, a lot of the information that was shared during the last 12 months of the learning group. But we also did some follow-up research to that, and also some independent and new research to do some highlighted in-depth look at 4 city case studies and looking at the rental policies and programs that have been enacted in those places. And I've already mentioned, sort of one of the top line findings from doing that was realizing that, having multiple initiatives was important, and also working with stakeholders both within and outside government to bring those multiple rental efficiency initiatives together and coordinate, that was really important. So we're going to hear from one of the cities we profiled, Minneapolis, here in a second. We also do highlight some initiatives by Boulder, Colorado, and Fort Collins, Colorado, also Milwaukee. You can find more detail about that in the report. And we highlighted several lessons learned from these case studies that I think will be, applicable and helpful for, folks that are thinking about, at the local level, getting into not only just developing these policies and programs, but implementing them. So just real briefly, I'll throw out a couple of things from this list. In addition to what I've already mentioned, we found that, having some sort of seed funding, whether that's from, maybe in some cases the federal government or philanthropic sources or state governments, was really helpful to get some of these initiatives off the ground. But these local governments have also worked to develop sort of sustainable funding sources to keep those things going. Really, if you want to make sure you're reaching low-income renters, which I mentioned is very important given the cost burdens that they're faced with, then you really have to design programs and policies to reach those folks and make sure that you're protecting them, at the end of the day, and achieving deep savings and reaching a lot of those folks is oftentimes, it comes back to this point about having more than one program or having more than one initiative. That's one thing that jumps out with a lot of these case studies. And lastly, but definitely not least, is very important, and I think is going to be really critical for the development of future policies and programs. But, continually, we talked about community engagement as a preliminary first step, but it's really important to continue to do that engagement with renters, as implementation goes on. And we highlight some examples in the case studies of where that's been really pivotal to making sure that the programs that are enacted are effective and that they continue to get participation. And so that's something you can also pick up on as well. Finally, again, you'll have access to some of these slides here. Make sure to check out not only the report, but our new Energy Equity for Renters initiative. We sent out an email highlighting that today, but we're going to be doing a lot more technical assistance with one-on-one technical assistance with local governments in the future, highlighting some of the developments in rental efficiency policies as we move forward. And of course, I'm always able and willing and happy to talk more about any of this. So feel free to reach out to me as well. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Ariel.
Thank you, Stefan. All right. And for someone put a question in the chat on where to access the report, and I see Catherine posted it there. So if you want to see the report that Stefan was talking about, the link is in the chat. All right. And now last but not least, we will hear from Isaac Evans, the energy-related contract manager for the City of Minneapolis's Green Cost Share program. Isaac will discuss insights from the City of Minneapolis's 4D energy efficiency program and share the program staff's experiences and lessons learned serving renters. Take it away, Isaac.
Perfect. I'll just get my screen share up here. Perfect. You guys see just the slides? All right. All right. So as Ariel said, my name is Isaac Evans. I am the energy-related contract manager at the City of Minneapolis, a very bureaucratic title, but essentially I work on the city's Green Cost Share program, kind of doing all sorts of things from, setting up program contracts to kind of data management and visualization on that end. So I'm talking today about the city's 4D program. It's kind of a little bit complicated because there's multiple programs involved. And as Stefan said, there's kind of multiple initiatives that take place in a lot of these programs. So it's a combination of basically two programs. So the first is our 4D Affordable Housing Incentive Program. So that program is run out of our Community Planning and Economic Development Department and started with a pilot in 2018 and was really one of both the mayor and CPED's one of their primary objectives. And that is really kind of the preserving affordable housing side of this initiative. And then there's the program I work on, which is the city's Green Cost Share program, and that's run out of the health department. So that program is our renewable energy and energy efficiency incentive program here at the city, and together they kind of come together to make this 4D initiative. And why is it called 4D? It's nothing exciting. There's no fun acronym. It's literally section 4, subsection D of the low income rental housing classification at the state. So that's kind of the third key element of this is there's some enabling state tax legislation involved. Like I said, it's a combination of housing and energy efficiency incentives. The primary objective of this collaboration between our departments is to preserve low and moderate income rental units. These are usually market rate, so we're not targeting subsidized housing or public housing. We want to support the city's greenhouse gas and environmental justice goals, broadly reduce energy use, improve the health and well-being of tenants in low-income housing, and then really target our climate funding specifically in our environmental justice and frontline communities, which the 4D housing program allows us in the Green Cost Share to do pretty easily. And then lastly, we really wanted to create a program to address the split incentive problem in multifamily housing, which I'm sure many on the call are aware of. So, renters want to save money, but they might not have the funding or the legal authority to make the improvements, whereas a landlord who might not benefit from the energy savings but has the money doesn't want to necessarily make some of the improvements. So we really need to craft a program that was appealing to landlords in both the time commitment it would take as well as the level of incentive. I'm going to kind of use this modified diagram here and to kind of walk us through how these programs interact with each other to get energy efficiency and affordable housing units. And I added the logo from the Center for Energy and Environment, which is a really important external partner we have here in the city of Minneapolis. They actually run a lot of the utilities rebate programs, and they do energy audits, energy technical analysis, and are just kind of the experts in the rebate realm. So they're really important in this whole process as well. So first, I'll quickly go through the 4D Affordable Housing Incentive Program. I put the contact information of our primary staff over at CPED, the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. Looking at this diagram again, this is the housing side of the program. They qualify landlords for that state 4D special tax classification, and they do a lot of the ongoing compliance and follow-up to make sure landlords are living up to the commitments they made in their restrictive covenants and affordability agreements. They're overall just our state housing program experts and kind of walk the landlords through that process. Broadly, it exchanges tax reductions, so property tax reductions, for affordability commitments. So you get a 40% reduction in your property taxes on units participating in the housing program. And at least 20% of those units must be rented below 60% area median income to qualify. So if you have, a 5-unit apartment building, one of those units needs to be rented at or below 60% of area median income before you can even apply for the 4D housing program. And you only get the property tax reduction on that one unit. If you had 5 units, you'd get the 40-unit reduction on all 5 of those units. It's a little confusing because there's a lot of different percentages thrown in here, but hopefully that kind of example makes it clear. So in return for that, they sign a 10-year affordability agreement with the city as well as a restrictive covenant to maintain those units at 60% or below of area median income. Also, to kind of thinking, how could we incentivize or compensate landlord participation, because there is a lot of paperwork involved when you're signing agreements with the city and then needing to report things to the state. So we give a $100 upfront incentive per qualifying unit, up to $1,000 for those accepted applicants. These landlords also must list and accept Section 8 voucher participants into these buildings. And I put the link here below in case anyone wants to, type it out or look to see kind of the full list of requirements and timelines on the 4D program website. For a quick kind of snapshot, this is what 60% of area median income means right now in the city of Minneapolis. So you have the rent levels there, and then when an apartment turns over, you have to look at the household income. So that's why you have the household income and the rental side of things. And this is kind of a key component for us, is the ongoing compliance. So our staff at the CPED will do the annual compliance checks and follow-up. So landlords must submit the compliance form by January 31st every year. They must reapply for the state tax incentive annually. The first year, our city staff will really do the paperwork, walk landlords through it, and submit the paperwork to the state on their behalf. But then in the subsequent years, the landlord will be responsible for that resubmission. We're not leaving them out to dry. Our program staff are always, taking calls and are willing to re-walk people through that process every year. At turnover, these are just kind of things they're looking at in the compliance. So they're looking at new renters have incomes less than 60% of area median income. They look to make sure there's no excessive rent increases, that the rent is still at that AMI level. They don't, if you're subleasing, they need to have income verification, and just other violations of program covenants overall. Non-compliance is pretty simple. You lose your tax status, so you don't get that 40% discount on the unit, and you get a $500 per fine per unit annually from the city. And now the other side of this is taking all that housing work that's done by CPED and leveraging it in our green cost share program in our 4D specific energy efficiency incentives. And this is the program I work on specifically. So going back to our diagram, CPED will send us that list of participating properties. They get a new cohort in and qualified every March annually. And so they'll send that over to us, and we'll work with our partners at the Center for Energy Environment to, reach out to new and existing landlords about, these incentives. We'll give them technical assistance in navigating the rebate processes, the contractor bidder kind of review and management, doing the energy audits, and really kind of trying to take as much of the burden of doing multiple energy efficiency projects at the same time off the plate of the landlord, because there is a potential for some program fatigue when you're doing this housing sign up and then going into submit all your paperwork to the state, submit all your paperwork to CPED, and then you have to go get all the paperwork from contractors and bidders and sign more paperwork with the city. So kind of really taking as much of that or making it as easy for the landlords as possible is pretty key. Quickly, the cost share program is our city incentive program. It's more broad than just the 4D energy efficiency incentives. We kind of started in 2012 targeting dry cleaners and auto body shops and their pollution, their hazardous air pollutants. And today we really are mainly our solar and energy efficiency incentives. Here's what the 4D incentives are. So like I said, we started with really generous incentives. So the rebates, so any rebate you get from a utility program and the city match together will equal 90% of the total project cost. So the landlord at the end of the day will only have to pay for 10% of the total project cost for energy efficiency projects. And the requirements to join, obviously you need to be a part of the 40 affordable housing program to start. You cannot already have done your project, so we're not going to retroactively pay out for a project that you did before you joined the 4D program, or that you did last year but now you want to get paid for this year. It has to be a new project. They must qualify for a utility rebate or be what we're calling an energy efficiency enabling project. That's like knob and tube wiring or increasing ventilation. That is a really important aspect to highlight. Both because we use the utility rebate because our utility partners are really the experts in determining what is a worthwhile project to do in a house or an apartment building. And then the energy efficiency enabling projects, well, they might be more expensive. It might cost more usually to fix your knob and tube wiring, but you can't put in new insulation unless you help them fix the knob and tube wiring. So if our program was only covering the energy efficiency side of things, it would be a lot more challenging to convince landlords to, get over the line and do an energy efficiency project. And then we also stipulate that, we want the highest energy efficiency available in any product that's either available or recommended for the apartment. If we're putting money into it, we want to see the 96% efficient furnaces. Quick timeline, they'll start off by getting an energy audit, identify rebates, and gather reviews with our partners at the Center for Energy and Environment. They'll submit an application to the 4D program. It's not guaranteed if you're in the 4D housing program that you'll get 4D energy efficiency funding, but we do try to fund as many as possible. We'll review those applications and then they'll submit for reimbursement once all the projects are completed. In case you're curious, we have primarily two funding sources. One was a specially negotiated utility franchise fee. That money comes to us each year through our Energy Vision Advisory Committee, which is a part of our Clean Energy Partnership with the utilities. And then we have a Health Department Pollution Control Annual Registration fee. We also are this year submitting with the city to get some of the American Resource Recovery stimulus funding to go towards this work. Some quick outcomes and lessons learned. I kind of pulled our highest level stats for the two programs. So overall, there's 1,400 units. The housing side of the program has been in full operation since 2019. So this will be its third full year. And that's spread across 340 buildings. So it's a lot of smaller apartment, duplexes, quadplexes, not as many like larger buildings as we mentioned before. A lot of the larger buildings being built in the city aren't at an affordable rate. And actually 88% of the units in the housing program are rented at 50% of area median income or lower. So actually, we are worried maybe to get a level off at 60% of AMI because it's kind of made like a step. But it's good to see that we're preserving units that are even more affordable than the maximum stipulated in the program. And then on the energy efficiency side, we've hit about 300 of those units of the 1,400 total so far. Spread across 49 buildings. And I put some preliminary data for 2021. A lot of the projects haven't been completed yet. Our top lessons learned here, like I said, the importance of technical assistance and heavy staff and our external partner involvement with landlords. So a lot of these landlords are smaller landlords. They don't own a lot of properties. They might be working a day job. A lot of times I call people and they're working their regular job, and it's a big time commitment to get through all of these forms and processes, but it's like, well, you need to do them to get the rebates, or you need to do them to get our funding, because that's how we were able to set up this program. So having our technical assistance partners and then the assistance we provide is pretty key to get landlords over the line. And I would highly advocate for anyone looking to do a program to look into those health and safety and energy efficiency enabling projects, as we kind of use those terms interchangeably. It can increase the cost of your program if you start covering them, but I think it's worthwhile for the trade-off to get more projects, to convince more people to do projects. It's, you know, when you're tightening up a house with insulation, you're going to have to put in more ventilation, or you're going to have to replace the old wiring or bring it up to code as you're doing these deep retrofits. And that's something to think about while you're designing a program. Is, are you going to go beyond just like the cost of the furnace? Leverage existing housing and utility programs and partners. So one thing we noticed was a really low utilization rate of the already existing low-income housing programs that the utility had, and then leveraging, you know, this 4D affordable housing program to really make it easy on the energy efficiency side to qualify people. You know, we're not, our staff's not doing any income verification or compliance checks. That's all done by a different department or by the utilities. I think having a high level of incentives initially, we've actually heard our housing partners say that's driven people into the affordable housing program. So people are joining the program to get access to the energy efficiency incentives. So that's kind of cool to hear that we're helping preserve affordable housing just because we have energy efficiency incentives. And one thing I really like about ours is thinking about, while we're targeting our funding, how do we ensure that that funding continues to help renters that are low to moderate income? And with that 10-year restrictive covenant that comes with the 4D housing program, we know that at least for 10 years, our energy efficiency money that we put into a property will go towards LMI tenants. And you know, it's been called climate or green gentrification in the past, and it's something we're really trying to tackle with some of our other programs where we put funding like solar arrays, where we don't have that necessarily have that kind of restrictive covenant or guarantee. And then one last one I thought of when I was going through this morning that I forgot to update was a question that seldom gets asked on a lot of incentive programs is, what are the tax implications for this? And thinking about, you know, if I'm just going to give money to an individual who doesn't have an LLC, that could increase their income tax burden. So really kind of thinking through those questions on how you're going to structure the financing while you're setting up a program. Looking forward, I threw together this chart to just show, you know, the city's cost portion has really increased since the pilot in 2018. So we're looking at kind of how can we do a better cost balance of the city costs versus utility and landlord costs. And I think that's primarily driven by, you know, the type of buildings. The first year the pilot was really ultra affordable housing, and then, you know, it got opened up to more moderate income housing as well. We're also looking at, you know, how can we tackle electrification? What does that look like to start moving away from incentivizing fossil fuels entirely? And then how do we look at new construction, affordable housing, and get into there? And this ECO Act is just passed by the Minnesota government this year, I think is going to be really important to answering all these questions. And it could be a resource for other jurisdictions to look at too. But it's essentially a modernization of our state's energy efficiency program. So it is adding efficient fuel switching incentives. Those are now rebatable. We weren't able to get rebates on, you know, switching from a furnace to a heat pump. There's more carve outs for multifamily housing, low income multifamily housing. Sorry, did my mic just go out?
It did, but I can hear you now.
Okay, that was weird. I'm talking. I don't know why it would time out. But then they're also going to be looking at and opening a docket on what they're going to start including those sort of health and safety or they're calling it pre-weatherization work. So those that like knob and tube wiring, ventilation, all that kind of stuff that needs to come alongside energy efficiency improvement. So we're really hoping to use that list that they come up with at the Public Utilities Commission to better tailor our program. That's all I have for you. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Isaac. We're now going to go into Q&A for this session, and we'll take questions from the audience. So if you have more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. Isaac, many questions came in for you during your presentation. A lot of them, I think, are kind of like, they can be some rapid fire, like quick answers, clarification questions. So I'm going to run through some of these with you now, all right? Okay.
That's fine.
Great. Let's see. So one question was asking if the programs you talked about, they're for renters, are they for only multifamily buildings, or are they also for renters in single family buildings?
So the 4D program, the housing side, originally started with just 4 units and up, but they recently expanded this year to include single family renters. So we're now qualifying, by default, they're qualified for our energy efficiency programs now too.
Awesome. How are units screened for rent eligibility? As an example, are you obtaining rent rolls to compare against income thresholds?
That they accept, so when a unit turns over, they have to get, there's like a paper that's included with the leasing documents, a data practices form that the tenant will sign, and then we'll get income information from the tenant. So that's when a unit turns over. When they're just entering the program, they give us their rent information. Like
Awesome.
what is their monthly rent?
Sure. How many city staff support the 4D program, and how much staff time is dedicated to these programs?
So I'm the 4D energy efficiency person. It's myself, and then my director works on it. So it's a part of the cost share. So I spend, it's the cost share is 1 FTE for me. And then in CPED, I think it's 2 additional full-time staff.
Okay.
And then we have our contractor at the Center for Energy Environment that we pay annually or pay hourly.
Sure. Does the 4D program overlap at all with the Weatherization Assistance Program or the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program?
In terms of like, can they access both pots of money?
I think that's the intention of the question, yeah.
Okay, yeah, yes, they could access both pots of money, and they do look at, one way to qualify is to be a part of the Weatherization Assistance Program or LIHEAP, because they're looking at your income level too when you're applying to those programs. So if you show that your apartment has like LIHEAP tenants in these units, then that kind of counts as one of your income verifications.
Okay. Let's see. What type of community engagement did the City of Minneapolis do to develop the 4D program?
Yeah, so we spoke primarily with landlords. So there's a couple of landlord associations and building owner associations in the city when talking about the energy efficiency improvements, because they're, without kind of changing, and I think this is part of the report too, where looking at giving renters more right to, do the improvements. We thought the main leverage point was to talk with the landlords and sort of what they want to see out of a program. What is their hold up for not doing energy efficiency? Why aren't they utilizing existing utility rebate programs? And we saw that it was, a lack of knowledge on some of the programs, time commitment. It takes a lot to pull together different projects and programs by yourself. And then, other ones just weren't interested in doing upgrades at all.
Sure, great. All right, there's more questions for you, Isaac, but I'm going to pass it over to Catherine now and come back to some more of those questions for you.
Yeah, I can put my
Catherine,
email in the
yeah,
chat too.
awesome.
Don't get to everything.
All right, Catherine, a question came in for you. Do you have any experience on what happens to tenants when they switch from master meter buildings to in-unit electrified meters? And what happens to renters when they go from central heating into having individual heating in units when tenants are paying bills. So what are some of the impacts on housing affordability, I suppose?
Yeah, I saw several different electrification questions come in while I was speaking, and I do want to emphasize that this group mostly focused on energy efficiency. I'm going to place in a chat if you'd like to explore this topic more. I'll respond quickly, but USDN did fund a series of electrification related studies on electrification in multifamily last year through our innovation fund. So the link I placed in the chat has a ton more detail. But to answer that question in short, it really depends on the type of fuel and where you are in the country. Right now, the economics of electrification in the United States are driven a lot by the type of climate you're in and also the type of original fuel that you might be switching from to electrify. So for example, I'm here in New England and there's still quite a few residences that are on oil heat or more electric resistance heat. So these are very expensive and highly inefficient. So as a tenant, electrifying using a heat pump usually generates some cost savings in those cases, but there are a lot of different things to consider. For instance, if you qualify for a low-income rate and you're switching from gas to electricity, then you actually have to take a look at the different rate structures and the different levels of incentive for those two different subsidized rates to actually understand what the change in energy burden is. I only know of a few locations that have gone into that level of depth of really understanding what the implications are for different rate classes and for people who would be in different situations. That's all just to say that it is a complicated question. It's hard to give a straightforward answer to because there's a lot of variance around the country. But as I said, in some of those specific cases where people are moving from oil to electrification, which has a high cost, that we are seeing sort of positive impacts for tenants. If you want more, the link in the chat that I gave you is very detailed in terms of conversations that the group had with tenants and landlords and affordable housing developers on this very topic.
Awesome. Thank you, Catherine. All right, I saw a few questions come in around best practices for reaching landlords, so Landlord Outreach. I'm wondering, Stefan, Isaac, or Catherine, if you have any thoughts on this.
I mean, there's a variety of different ways that you can go about, interacting with landlords, and I think it also depends on sort of the kind of properties that you're thinking about. For example, a lot of the naturally occurring or unsubsidized affordable housing that is in the country, while some of it, we do have a fair, size of subsidized housing. Most affordable housing is still unsubsidized, naturally occurring. Those tend to be, both owned and managed by sort of individuals or, maybe a couple of people, folks that are not part of sort of a professional property management company in a lot of cases. And so, for those folks, sort of like what Isaac was saying, you want to think about sort of local landlord groups or real estate groups where folks meet and exchange information, and those groups exist in a lot of the communities across the country. Once you get to your bigger buildings, then and also too, if you're talking about maybe some of the single family owners that are out there that have a lot of different properties, then there are sort of, you can start thinking about maybe more regional or national property management associations that you can plug into. And there are some of those that do exist even on the local level too, like specific chapters of different organizations. There's a lot of different options out there. Kind of, like I said, it does kind of depend on specifically kind of the stock you have in mind. But I'm happy to follow up with whoever has that question if you'd like to kind of narrow it down to maybe something that would be helpful for your circumstance.
Yeah, and I think this is the question that I was trying to get all the questions in there. Do we have any rental registration or licensing program? So we can just pull rental licenses from our permitting and licensing database and get all that contact information that way as well to kind of send program information to.
Awesome. Great. Another clarifying question for you, Isaac. Someone asked what the relationship is between the city and the organization CEEE. Are they a branch of a utility, a separate nonprofit? Was it a competitive process to identify them as the one to implement your program?
Yeah, so they applied for, one thing we did is we added climate outreach and kind of climate and energy to our master contracting process at the health department. So they applied through our master contract request for proposal. And how they're set up, they used to be a part of the city a long time ago, but they are a separate nonprofit now. And they're what's called an alternative SIP provider, which is the Conservation Improvement Program here in the state. So that's the state's legislation. So they are a separate nonprofit and they do run some of the utilities rebates programs. We also contract with some of the other alternative SIP providers to hit different sectors. The Minnesota Chamber of Commerce has a nonprofit wing called Energy Smart, and they do a lot of outreach and rebate coordination for small businesses. They're an alternative SIP provider. Our Port Authority, the St. Paul Port Authority, does it, and then Interchange does it for nonprofits. So that it is kind of like a list of people that do this that are part of the XL finding people to do it, and then we contract with them.
Awesome, thank you. The next question could be for all three of you based on your experience, but somebody asked, how has COVID, the eviction moratoriums affected progress on rentalEE programs? And I might make this broader, how has maybe COVID in general affected progress on these programs?
Ooh, in many ways, if you don't mind me going first. So one is supply chain disruption to actually get equipment to do the projects. Projects are taking a lot longer to kind of get some of the equipment in and get it installed, as well as price increases. Um, a furnace might go up a couple $100 in cost between the beginning of the year and now. So that is one disruption, sort of that economy bounce back, price increase situation going on. And also, yeah, more hesitancy from landlords to undertake even 10% of the cost, which that was another question in there. They do have to cover 10% of the cost of the upgrades, but a little more impact because they're worried about their own rent, their own income and stuff like that.
Yeah, I was going to add, so there's some research that I know is ongoing right now to sort of get a better sense for this on the national scale, sort of how this is all affecting decisions with properties and capital improvements or other sorts of improvements, and just the situation for renters overall. There have been some studies over the past year that have looked specifically at particular markets, and have done surveys of landlords to see what how a drop in income, rental revenue, might affect their decision making. And we touch on this somewhat in the report too, just with the latest research. But it's especially been very hard on sort of your smaller landlords, so not sort of the big companies that are out there. And the available evidence, it tends to indicate that there are a couple of things that folks are thinking about in terms of responding to that drop in revenue. And one of which is delaying capital improvements and maintenance. So this is something that comes up pretty prominently in the surveys that have been conducted. So there's certainly get the sense that something like energy efficiency retrofit or other energy improvement work is for those properties especially is not is not top of mind right now. Some folks are also, if they're in a particularly bad situation, or landlords financially, then they're also thinking about selling. So it has increased the sense that or the likelihood that a landlord might sell a property in the near future. And, what this means is, especially, we're talking about, I said this is smaller landlords. Those are oftentimes the landlords that own that naturally occurring or unsubsidized affordable housing. And so that really puts a lot of the low income folks who have maybe more affordable housing at risk, in terms of just their energy burdens and also, down the road of losing that housing if it is indeed sold. So, but yeah, I think you'll see a lot more research coming out on this in the near future.
I would add a couple of points, just from a practical perspective in terms of the impacts on program and program development overall. The pandemic was not easy on local governments. A lot of people who were working in sustainability departments for 6 to 8 months, sometimes longer, were reassigned to other tasks. So there certainly was sort of a slowdown in sort of progress of program development and ability to implement new programs for rental housing. Another thing that we investigated last summer was we were also curious what the impact of COVID was having on some indicators that we try to track within USDN, and we were hearing, much like Stefan alluded to, that energy burden had increased with stay-at-home orders and people being home more. I think there was some data out of Austin Energy that bills were up 20-30%, and so basically energy burden was being experienced more heavily. On the other side of the coin, especially in areas of the country that experienced extreme heat last summer and then again this summer, there were sort of a lot of questions about the role that energy efficiency and electrification could play in providing relief from the heat. And a lot of what we basically discovered last summer is a lot of the utility incentive programs were not prepared to deal with the level of demand for HVAC that occurred during those heat waves. There was a coalition that was at the Massachusetts Energy Efficiency Advisory Council advocating for more HVAC incentives or some sort of easier process. So I certainly think that COVID-19 has definitely revealed some challenges to some of our existing incentive programs, and in addition to all the implications that the others two just discussed.
Awesome, thank you all. All right, I have one more question for Isaac. Isaac, what were the biggest barriers and challenges that you faced in the setup and execution of your program?
From the energy efficiency side, the fact that it piggybacked off of the existing green cost share structure made it relatively easy. I think more of the barriers and challenges probably came at figuring out how to implement a 4D housing program. So as I said, that's a state kind of framework that's laid out. So any local or tribal government can set up a 4D program. So, St. Paul has one, St. Louis Park, which is by us, has one, Edina has one. So multiple cities have a 4D program. So I think that was probably the more of the challenge. And then I guess on the incentive side, one of our challenges is kind of constantly trying to figure out what is the sweet zone for incentives. We think we're probably a little high at the moment, and that we could get similar results with lower incentives and a higher landlord match. But I think finding that sweet zone and then finding the sweet zone with energy efficiency enabling projects has been particularly hard. Like, where do we draw the line there, to kind of try to control costs from the city side?
Awesome, thank you. All right, I'm going to ask one final quick question to either Stefan or Catherine. Someone asked if you could share an example of a region-specific report, program example, or project from the Southeast, where they said it's a little harder maybe to make some of these programs.
There definitely are examples. We actually have a separate partner network of ours, the Southeast Sustainability Directors Network, and I know that they have actually had similar conversations. So I'm happy to pass along that information to ACEEE. I can't like quite remember in 30 seconds, but we did have active Southeast members in this learning group. So there are examples to be had.
Yeah, sorry for the delay there. I mean, I was just trying to think of sort of, we have so many examples in the report. You know, I was also I would say that, you know, when you look at the Southeast there, and specific examples are escaping me now, but you know, there are certainly a lot of folks that are using incentive programs, you know, that mirror some of the structure that we talk about. We talk about, I don't know if you, some people may consider this the South and some people not, but you know, Dallas, I think has done some, you know, some work to, you know, look at sort of how they can take some of the existing incentive and financing programs that are out there for housing and leverage that to, you know, get folks to make energy improvements. We mentioned that briefly in the report, and I've been kind of following along with their program development. Sounds like they're continuing to kind of evolve that, you know, beyond even what it was a year or two ago. So, you know, that might be something to check out.
Awesome. Thank you, Stefan. All right, well, we are at time. So thank you everybody for participating in today's webinar. You will all receive a link to the recording as well as the PDF slides from each of the presenters in a day or so. And we will also be posting a recording of the webinar on ACEEE's YouTube page, so you can also access it there. If we were unable to get to your question, or if you have any further questions, please reach out to the speakers via email after the webinar. And we hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to hearing from you again soon. Take care, everybody.